Some people, we've got guests here this evening, so welcome guests here this evening. We've got people returning to Sangha Night who have not been for years as well, so it's just great to see all of you, basically. It's really nice to see all of you at Sangha Night. And you join us at a good time because we've been going through a series looking at the wheel of life and the spiral and the goal of Buddhism. So we've been looking at the predicament where we find ourselves in, trapped on the wheel of life. Then we've been looking at the path leading away from that, the spiral path. And now we're at a point in our series where we're going to be looking at the goal of Buddhism. And we started that last week. So last week, Vidanya introduced, you might, if you're here, or none of us were here because it was the heat wave, wasn't it? A lot of us were on Zoom in our underwear, it's so hot. And that's good to be here, fully clothed. Last week, Vidanya introduced the Buddha as the goal of enlightenment. And yeah, he explained, he introduced lots of different ways we could engage with the Buddha as the goal of Buddhism, what that means to enlighten being that goal of Buddhism. And he explained that there's a danger that if we don't have a really enticing, exciting goal, the danger is we reduce Buddhism down to just a kind of self-help thing, which it can be. We can make ourselves better and happier, and Buddhism does that, but the goal of Buddhism takes us way beyond that. That's just a starting point. And if the goal of Buddhism isn't that exciting, after a while we'll go off and try another form of self-help, or we won't be bothered to get out of bed to meditate because it's we're too tired. So we need something that really motivates us. We need to have a goal of Buddhism, a way of relating to the goal that is exciting and moves us. So we began exploring that last week. And Vidanya told a story about after the Buddha was very recently enlightened, he met a Brahmin wandering along. So a Brahmin would be a holy person in the Hindu caste system. And the Brahmin was obviously receptive and noticed something about the Buddha, something was different about him. And he was curious, so he went up and asked him, well, what are you? What kind of being are you? He obviously could tell like this wasn't an ordinary person. And he asked the Buddha, well, are you a god? And the Buddha said, no, it wouldn't be true to say I'm a god. And then he went through all these different classifications of different types of spirits and deities that were in the Indian mythology at that time. And the Buddha said, no, I'm not any of those. And so this guy said, well, are you a human being? And the Buddha said, it wouldn't be true to say I'm a human being either, which just left this guy completely confused and might leave us completely confused as well. So he said, well, what are you? And he replied, I am a Buddha. And the term Buddha means someone who's woken up. And this is why we now call Siddhartha Gautama the Buddha, because he used that way of describing himself, someone who's woken up. So that's what Buddha means, awakened, someone who's woken up. So the Buddha straight away was using a metaphor to describe his experience, the metaphor, an analogy of waking up from a dream. So it's as if the rest of us trapped on the wheel of samsara are asleep. We're asleep, and the Buddha has woken up from that dream. So it's not literally true, but it's a metaphor, and we can kind of relate to that, how sometimes you have a dream and things seem very, very vivid, very true, very real, and very scary. We really get caught up in them, and we're really chasing after things that seem really important in the dream. And then we wake up and suddenly wonder, well, what was all that about? Why was I chasing after that thing? It's not so important, and why was I? It's not real. So it's a metaphor to describe what the Buddha's enlightenment might have been like. He used that analogy. It's like waking up from a dream. And then Vidanya also used the movie Matrix as a metaphor or analogy, how people are trapped in a particular experience of reality, this virtual reality in the Matrix, but some people have escaped that, and they're trying to go back into the Matrix to free other people. And this is how Vidanya described the Buddha, outside of the dream, woken up, but going back into the dream to try to free other people, to liberate them, to wake them up. So, the Buddha was alive 2,500 years ago, and he definitely had a human body. So it wasn't true to call him a human, he said. But he had a human body, and that human body is dead now. So where does that leave us 2,500 years later? And where does that leave enlightenment and the enlightened mind, the Buddha? So I think it's really curious about this idea that the Buddha wasn't a human. So it wasn't his body, because his body was still a human body, but there's something different about his consciousness. The consciousness of an awakened being is radically different than anything we can imagine. And it's said to be outside of time and space. The Buddha's enlightenment experience is beyond time and space. So there's something of that enlightened experience we can still tap into, or maybe echoes of that within our experience. It's like the enlightened mind, the Buddha, is trying to wake us up in this. We're still trapped in this sleep, and the Buddha is trying to wake us up, like Morpheus in the Matrix, trying to send a message to Neo to wake him up. And that might sound hard to believe, but we went on a pilgrimage to northern India, and we meditated in a place called we did meditate in Sarnath, but a place called Shravasti. And the Buddha had lived for about 30 years in Shravasti, and it was off the beaten track, so not many people were there. It was quite quiet, and just my experience of meditating there was like, it felt like the Buddha was still there. Something of the Buddha's enlightenment was still there at Shravasti thousands of years later. That this deep energy, this deep presence. So, the Buddha is mysterious. The Buddha's enlightenment is mysterious. We can't understand it, but something of the Buddha and the Buddha's enlightenment experience is available to us. Is trying to, if we're receptive to us, trying to call to us, trying to wake us up from this sleep. And Vidanya read out a poem last week, or some verse from a Mahayana sutra called the Avatamsika Sutra. And the Buddha also said, before I read that out, the Buddha also said that his enlightenment was beyond words and concepts. What he saw, what the Buddha experienced, can't be described in words and concepts. He used words and concepts, but they point towards his experience. They can't capture his experience. So Buddhism uses a lot of concepts. It's very rational. It's a very rational path. But the Buddha also used lots of other, you could say, languages. We call it the language of the depths. The language of myth, symbol, poetry, ritual, story, metaphor, that goes kind of underneath, kind of deeper than the concepts, and kind of touches us at a deeper level. So maybe if the enlightened mind is trying to wake us up, it's going to be through symbols, it's going to be through myth, it's going to be through stories. Maybe that's going to be more direct, unmediated communication with the enlightened mind. So hopefully I'm not freaking you out if this is your first time at Sangha Night. So I'm going to read out I think all of the text that Vidanya read last week. So this is a description of the Buddha, but not the kind of human form of the Buddha that lived 2,500 years ago, but maybe the archetypal Buddha, the principle of enlightenment, who's outside of time and space, still sitting there on the throne, on the diamond throne of enlightenment. As the Buddha takes his seat on the throne of enlightenment, his clear, radiant light, like 1,000 suns, lights up the whole of space. As the Buddha takes his seat on the throne of enlightenment, at the foot of the great tree, a deep and awesome roar shakes the world in all the 10 directions. The truly awake, the great sage emerges, understanding all things, gone to the other shore, filling space with clear light, rocking the world like an earthquake. See him sitting on the diamond seat of enlightenment, waking up to all wisdom, ending darkness and suffering. See him walking from place to place, his body full of virtues, mindful, thoughtful, the great man walking like a lion. See the supreme teacher full of great compassion, turning the wheel of the teachings, freeing countless beings. The enlightened one, most free, transcending the world, relying on nothing, liberating beings from states of suffering, unaffected, unattached, not trapped in mental constructions, his mind gone beyond all boundaries. The clear light of his enlightened wisdom pervades everywhere. Never fading, never changing. His voice fills the world, speaking to each in his own language, telling the way to freedom, filling the mind with joy. Just as water flows under the ground everywhere at all times, and can be found by those who dig, the Buddha's wisdom is like this. The Buddha's all-pervading wisdom is in the minds of all beings, wrapped in deluded thoughts, but they are not aware. Just as ultimate reality has no limits, beyond time, but present in all times, the realm of the Buddha is like this, pervading all times without hindrance. Truly awake, the great sage, gone to the other shore, the friend of the world, whose sphere is endless, his wisdom and energy beyond measure, who from the depths of his great compassion causes us to seek the noble Dharma. So I'd never heard that before until last week, and I was really struck by some of that imagery. I really like the idea of the water flowing under the ground all the time, and people who dig can find the Buddha's wisdom, people who dig for it. Yeah, so it's evoking this principle of enlightenment, the enlightenment that's possible at all times, throughout space and throughout time. It's different different but not different to the historical Buddha who was alive 2,500 years ago, who died. It's trying to describe his consciousness, that what he experienced, which is mysterious, and I'm not going to pretend to understand it, but poetry, metaphor, symbols, the Buddha and Buddhist tradition used these to try and evoke that experience. And maybe to try and communicate to us, to try and speak, to maybe a part of us that does understand, my rational mind doesn't understand, but maybe the symbols and the myth and the poetry can communicate to at some level and resonate at some level, spark us off at some level. So, a description like that, it sounds very beautiful and evocative, but it's still quite ethereal. It's hard to grasp, it's hard to engage with, maybe hard to relate to. It can seem a bit abstract. Like, how do we relate to that? How do we relate to something that seems so ethereal and mysterious? So it's easier, it can be easier to have a form of the Buddha, an embodied form of the enlightened mind that we can engage with as a symbol of enlightenment, which is, as I say, looks more like us, but it doesn't look anything like us. But it's an embodied form. It's more like a being. So if we look at how do I turn it on, Edward? Hey, so this is a form, an image of the Buddha Vairocana. So the Buddha Vairocana, I think is very, very similar to how the Buddha is described in that passage of the Avatamsika Sutra. But rather than it being kind of words and metaphor, we've got an image that we can look at and we can relate to, a being that we can relate to. It's an embodiment of those qualities. So the Buddha Vairocana is made of white light, this clear white light that's referred to in the Avatamsika Sutra, that illuminates, brings light into the darkness. It's an image for wisdom that lights up dark. So, if you had the experience of darkness and then light emerges and you can see more clearly, and maybe you're less afraid because the light has come. So the Buddha Vairocana is made of clear white light, just radiating, shining. And he said when the Buddha taught, it was said the Buddha taught with a lion's roar, which is quite an interesting metaphor as well. So this is a historical Buddha was described when he taught the Dharma. It was like a lion roaring in the jungle. So I think with all of these images, metaphors, analogies, just let them resonate, reflect on what that might be trying to communicate. For me, when it communicates authority, like a lion roaring, it communicates power. It communicates like it's a noise that will cut through all the other sounds of the jungle, and the other animals will just be quiet and listen and pay attention. So, so the Buddha's Dharma teaching is raw. His communication, the Dharma, was like this. And that was how the Buddha, this archetypal Buddha principle, was described like this. Vairocana is said to ride, his throne is carried by 4 lions. So he's associated with the animal of the lion. And he carries the wheel, the Dharma chakra, the wheel of the Dharma. Again, there's a lot of symbolism with the historical Buddha. The Buddha was said to, he said he begun the wheel of the Dharma turning. He turned the wheel of the Dharma when he first communicated the Dharma. So this was an image the historical Buddha used. And then the Buddha Vairocana again, he's holding a wheel of the Dharma, turning a wheel of the Dharma. So again, we can ask ourselves, what is this communicating about the Dharma, about the teaching of the Dharma, about the Buddha? I think for me, it's like there's something beyond generations, beyond maybe, eternal is not the right word, but beyond time. The Dharma is always there, ready to be communicated. And in our lifetime, it was our historical Buddha who set it turning. And it's up to each generation of the Buddha's disciples to keep that wheel turning. If we receive the Dharma and then pass it on, the wheel goes round again, the wheel of the Dharma turns again. So there's a symbol about teaching of the Dharma with a wheel. So Varochana, maybe it's a bit easier to relate to the image of Varochana maybe than the verses that I read out, which are quite a bit abstract. But for me, Varochana is still quite a mysterious figure. There's not a lot to say about Varochana or known about Varochana. It's quite a difficult symbol to engage with. For me, I know I've got friends actually who are devotees of Varochana. They meditate on Varochana and visualize Varochana. I've got one friend who does. But for me, it seems quite, again, difficult to grasp symbol. For me, that I like the lion, I like the light, but apart from that, there's not a lot to engage with Varochana for me. So we're still left with this issue. How do we engage with the goal of Buddhism in a way that's going to excite us and not confuse us? Maybe confuse it, but in a positive way. But engage us, make us want to practice, make us really want to strive for enlightenment. We need images that speak to us, and we need an image of the goal that speaks to us. So when the Buddha taught, the historical Buddha, a big feature of the Buddha's communication was it was specific to the person he met. The Buddha would meet a person, and he seemed to have a real empathy for the people he met and would just give them the teaching that they needed, a particular teaching that they needed to either move them towards enlightenment or to liberate them completely. He would give them a specific teaching. So there's the kind of general principles of the Dharma he discovered, but when he met somebody, he wouldn't usually give the general principles. He'd give a more specific teaching that related to them. And I think if the Dharma's trying to speak to us now, if the Buddha's trying to speak to us outside of time and space, he's going to give us a symbol he's going to need a symbol that speaks to us directly, a more personal, more specific symbol. So, when white light strikes a prism, or when white light hits like raindrops or water, it breaks up into more specific colours. It breaks up into the colours of the rainbow, all the different colours. And they're not kind of different from that white light. You could say they're part of that white light, but they're specific aspects of it. And you could say when that principle of eternal Buddhahood meets a particular devotee or disciple, it becomes a more particular form. It takes a more particular form. So I'll show you this. So it's said like just in the same way as the white light would split into different colours. If you look deeply into Varochana, he becomes 4 different Buddhas. Varochana turns into 4 different coloured Buddhas: a red Buddha, a green Buddha, a blue Buddha, and a yellow Buddha. And this is a famous symbol called the Mandala of the 5 Buddhas, or the 5 Conquerors. And what we're going to do over the next coming weeks, we're going to just spend a week looking at each of these symbols of enlightenment, just to see, well, if there one of them that speaks to you? They might not do, and that's completely fine, but is there one of these that speaks to you? And the thing about these archetypal Buddhas, these images, you could relate to them as a doorway into something else, because it's through contemplating this image or symbol, you're led, and over a period of time, repeatedly relating to an image, it leads you into the experience. Something of the qualities of the Buddha are communicated. You get a more vivid, vibrant sense of enlightenment through engaging with these figures. So we're going to introduce you to the symbols. So from the more mysterious form of Varochana, the illuminator who sits in the middle of that mandala, it splits into more particular forms that express particular aspects of Buddhahood, specific aspects of enlightenment. So they express the goal in a particular way that might resonate with a particular type of person, a particular temperament, and they might ignite or spark something off or resonate with particular people. So what I'm going to do is just briefly introduce you to the four Buddhas on this mandala. So a mandala, by the way, is you could call it a sacred. It's usually a circle. A mandala is usually a circle, and it's a complex symbol for consciousness, usually for an enlightened consciousness. And you see in Tibetan schools, they make mandalas out of sand, and they're really complex images. And so in a way, very complex, highly complex symbols. And so this is a complex symbol. And each of the Buddhas, when you look at them, is full of symbolism. I'll highlight some of it this evening, but there's full of symbols. And interestingly, if you look deeply and contemplate one of the Buddhas, it opens up into more figures. There's a family of bodhisattva figures that each Buddha is the kind of king of, the leader of. So it's another, you can't really grasp enlightenment. You try and pin it down as to one particular symbol, and it breaks into 4 symbols. And then you try and look into one of those Buddhas deeply, and then that breaks up into more bodhisattvas. So it's something about the ungraspable nature of enlightenment. You can't pin it down as to any one particular symbol. And if you try to, it just breaks up into more symbols. So anyway, that's a mandala of the 5 Buddhas. This is another picture. I think I prefer this one. And you see that just, again, the Buddhas are made out of light, and there's light kind of radiating everywhere. What I'm going to do is I'll introduce the 4 Buddhas, and then I'll talk a bit about my relationship to one of the Buddhas. So to begin with, we're going to look at them as being on 2 different axes. So there's an east and west axes, which actually looks like north and south on this diagram. So we've got a blue Buddha in the east and a red Buddha in the west. And you could say that they give expression to the inner aspect of enlightenment, the enlightened mind. The red Buddha, we've got the blue Buddha first. The blue Buddha Akshobhya, he is a clear blue colour associated with the time of day of dawn, the clear light of dawn. And when you can see everything very, very clearly, his name means unshakable. Akshobhya means unshakable. And you could say that he's associated with wisdom in particular, clear thinking, and maybe a symbol that resonates with individuals' temperaments who are drawn to clear thinking. They like precision, they like clarity, they like wisdom. So that kind of personality might be drawn to and engaged by this figure of enlightenment, the Buddha Akshobhya. Whereas on the west axis, we have the red Buddha Amitabha. And the red Buddha Amitabha is the warm red colour. He's associated with sunset and the sun, the setting sun. And he's a colour of red, which communicates emotion, love, compassion. And the symbol of Amitabha is the soft lotus, whereas the symbol of Akshobhya is the diamond-hard thunderbolt, the Vajra he's holding in his hand. So that, in a way, they're very different. They give expressions to different aspects of the same enlightenment experience, but they just highlight and emphasize a particular quality of the enlightened mind. So for Amitabha, you could say it's the heart, compassion, and his name means infinite light. It's this infinite red light, which, like love really just illuminates. The Buddha's love illuminates all things. So you've got the east-west axis, with the blue Buddha Amitabha, infinite light. That's the red one, sorry, Amitabha, infinite light. And the blue Buddha Akshobhya, associated with clear thinking, wisdom, clarity. Okay, so that's the given expression. These are images trying to communicate to us something of like the inner experience of the enlightened mind. Okay, then we've got the north and south axis, which you could say more to do with the enlightened mind manifesting in the world. So the green Buddha, Amoghasiddhi, his name means unstoppable success. His hand is held out in the gesture of fearlessness. And he's the Buddha of karma, of action. He's associated with midnight, the time of day of midnight. So green is a colour of growth. And I think about the unstoppability of the weeds in my garden. They'll grow through anything. Whatever he tried to do to stop them, the green weeds will grow. And so Amoga Siddhi is unstoppable. It's unstoppable success and action of the enlightened mind. We'll hear more about each of these Buddhas in the weeks to come. I'm just kind of just introducing you to them as symbols this evening. Whereas in the south, we get the Buddha Ratna Sambaba, whose name means jewel-born, the jewel being. Ratna Sambaba. He holds a jewel in his hand. And it's to do with abundance, the creation of beauty and abundance. And his hand is held out in the gesture of giving, of generosity. So this is and his golden colour is a very, very rich, abundant gold colour. His symbolism is surrounded by all these beautiful flowers. His time of day is midday, and he holds this beautiful jewel in his hand. So this is another way of thinking about enlightenment. Each of these figures are equally true of enlightenment, and they all seem quite different as well, don't they? And maybe some of them, as we contemplate them in the weeks to come, will seem really attractive to you. Maybe none of them will, and that's fine as well. Yeah. So we've got these 4 different Buddhas. So if we go back, we've got Vairocana, who is this clear white light illuminating everything, shining everywhere. The lion's roar trying to cut through our kind of sleeping state to wake us up, but a bit non-specific. And then you've got this white light breaking into these more specific images, this mandala of 5 Buddhas, the blue and the red Buddhas with maybe thinking and feeling, clear thinking and compassion. And then we've got unstoppable action and abundance and generosity. So over the coming weeks, we're going to be looking at this mandala in more detail. I just want to speak more generally about a few points about the mandala, maybe a few pointers for the series to come, and then just speak about my relationship to one of these figures, how that's worked for me. So first, I think I've said this already, you can't pin down symbols. I think that's one of the great things about symbols. You can't really understand them rationally, so it avoids us misunderstanding them, and it avoids us pinning it down and thinking we've understood it. We can't understand the symbol, but at the same time, the symbols communicate truth, they communicate something to us. So we have to kind of learn a slightly different language, which is how to engage with and contemplate a symbol so that it can tell us, it can reveal something about the truth of enlightenment. And rather than, it's great to say, well, I want to become kinder, I want to become more loving, but then to actually have a being that embodies that, you can get into a relationship with that. You can even, really what we need to do, and this might sound a bit wacky if it's your first week at Sangha Night, but we need to fall in love with enlightenment, which might sound a bit of a strange thing to say, but if you fall in love with a being or a person, you'll just do anything. You'll do anything it takes to be with them, or to make, you kind of become obsessed with them, and you'll do anything. All your emotions, there's no conflict. Your emotions are just there. Your energies are there. And this is said sometimes in other traditions, like the Sufi tradition, as well as in the in Buddhist tradition. This is a sought after state. If you can have that state as if you've fallen in love with the goal, all of your energies are there. You'll stop at nothing to get enlightened. In a way, that's the kind of state we want to cultivate. Is that we're in love with enlightenment. So you can't really be in love with an abstract quality like wisdom, or maybe you can. I can't. For me, it needs to be embodied. And friends are really good for that, because you can see friends who are wiser than you, or kinder than you, or more compassionate than you, and you can see how that's what it looks like embodied, to see a person who is kinder or more generous than me or wiser than me. But also friends are flawed, aren't they? We're all human beings, and we can't embody the goal for each other. So I need an embodied, a personality that I can be in relationship with, that I can contemplate on, be devoted to, I can fall in love with even. And again, this might sound a bit strange if it's your first night of Sangha Night, so apologies, but this is my experience actually. Like I think I know myself well enough to know that my motivation goes so far, and then if it's uncomfortable, I'm not going to do something. I need to be really motivated by something that seems bigger than me, to commit myself to it and to do it. So for me, I've taken on the practice of meditating each day and being devoted to Amitabha, the red Buddha. So I'll go back to Amitabha. So when I was ordained, I took Amitabha as a practice. It's called a yidam. We take on a bodhisattva or Buddha figure, an embodiment of enlightenment that we will contemplate as a way of contemplating the goal and getting into relationship with the goal. And in a way, this is a symbol for a symbol. Amitabha doesn't look like that. It's a picture. It's a symbol of Amitabha. When you contemplate Amitabha, it's hard to describe what Amitabha looks like when I contemplate Amitabha, but basically a bit like a red blur is what Amitabha looks like when I try and see Amitabha. It doesn't look like that. But the symbols are symbols for something else in a way. So they're not literal, but they're kind of a guide to what you might contemplate. And for me, my relationship, it feels like it's true to say, like that analogy of the Matrix and Morpheus trying to call to Neo and wake him up, and the enlightened mind trying to get through to us. Like Amitabha, I can say Amitabha is always there trying to get through to me. I'm just not always very good at listening or very good at bringing him to mind. It's like, the analogy I use is like a kind of a crackly phone line where I'll dial up. Maybe they have phones in the Matrix as well, don't they? But I kind of phone up in my meditation to try and spend some time with Amitabha. And unfortunately, like my stuff is in the way, like the contents of my mind and the complexity of my life. So it's just like Amitabha's there, quite faint, and it's a crackly line. But he's there. And then every now and then, there's a really clear line. And it's like, there's a really clear line. And there's times when I meditate on Amitabha and it feels like, Amitabha is there. And there is, I won't say much more than that, but it's a clearer line. Every now and then, it does feel like there's a blast of something from outside the dream. So, something from outside the dream is just a blast. I had this a couple of days, on Friday, just like this really 2-second blast of something which was outside my usual experience. And it gives me a lot of confidence, actually, that this isn't just made up. It's not just that somebody's, with a rational mind, thought of these symbols. What would be a nice way to draw a Buddha who was kind and compassionate? Let's make them red and let's make them... It's not how symbols don't come from the rational mind. I mean, this has been studied. I think Carl Jung famously drew on studies about 100 years ago, but all across different cultures, there are symbols that crop up in the unconscious mind, and they're the same symbols again and again in cultures that are separate from each other. It's not something that people have thought out, that, okay, how would we draw a kind of wise Buddha, let's make him blue, and a kind Buddha, let's make him red. These are symbols that have emerged through people's meditation, and they're not the same as enlightenment, but if you meditate on them, it's like there's a portal or a gateway, a doorway through to something that is beyond that. And that's why these symbols can be very, very powerful. So as we go, it's inevitable, we're going to use our head and our rational mind each week to say, oh yeah, I like that Buddha and I like that symbol. We're going to try and engage with it with our rational mind, but at the same time, try and each week be open to just allow the symbols to speak to you, and be open to being surprised. It might be that you thought you're going to be attracted to the kind of intelligent blue Buddha, but actually it's the green Buddha that resonates with. Something about the symbol of the green Buddha just stays with me, leaves an impact, or resonates with you, or sparks something off. So just be curious as to how the different symbols communicate to you and speak to you, and just see if any of them leave an impression on you, or you find them fascinating or beautiful or mysterious. And what I would say is the five Buddhas, you could see them as like 5 different doorways, different coloured doorways that lead from different places, but they lead into the same, you could say the same palace, the same realm. It's not like there's an intelligent Buddha and a kind Buddha who isn't intelligent, who's a bit thick, and there's a green Buddha who does lots of stuff but isn't very intelligent. Like they're particular symbols that they're attractive to particular people. So they're like a path you can follow and a doorway you can enter into that like you fit in through. But they take you into the same place. Once you meditate deeply on them, they take you through to that same experience of enlightenment, and they're communicating the same experience of enlightenment, but they're different symbols, like different ways into it. And the Buddha famously had a vision of people as lotuses. When the Buddha was enlightened, he had a vision of all of humanity being like lotuses, but different coloured lotuses, importantly, and different stages of growth. And you could see some of them were really ready to hear the truth, and they were like lotuses that would open up with just a little bit of teaching. And some were just like me, probably buried really deep in the mud. And others are kind of growing up. So did all human beings the Buddha saw as like lotuses growing, which is very, very important message, because it shows that every human being is growing. We might all be at different stages, but we've all got that potential for Buddhahood within us. But each of the lotuses were at different stages of development, and each of them, there were lots of different coloured lotuses. And for me, that communicates, well, we're individuals, we're not universal. The same universal symbol isn't going to work to us. We need a more specific symbol for the goal that's going to grab us and communicate to us. So over the coming weeks, these are just 4 symbols. There's loads of symbols of enlightenment in Buddhism. Very, very rich with symbolism. We're going to explore these 4 important symbols over the next 4 weeks. So see if any of them grab you. Just watch out for any spark just being ignited of curiosity or interest in any of these symbols. And then cultivate that, follow that like a thread. It's like a magical thread that if you follow it, it'll lead you towards enlightenment. It'll lead you off that wheel of samsara, and it will eventually liberate you, free you from that sleep state into being awake like the Buddha. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to split into discussion groups and then have a tea break, and then we'll come back and meditate after that. So for the discussion groups, we